Long before modern science could explain the world, ancient civilizations were building monuments that still leave experts unsettled today. Gigantic stones moved without machines. Sacred temples aligned perfectly with the stars. Lost cities disappeared into silence, leaving behind clues that feel more like riddles than history. Across deserts, jungles, and remote mountain ranges, archaeologists continue uncovering discoveries that challenge what we think humanity was capable of thousands of years ago. Some mysteries may have logical explanations waiting to be found. Others seem to grow stranger with every excavation. Who built these places? What knowledge has been lost to time? And why do so many ancient secrets remain unanswered? Tonight, we explore the world's most bizarre archaeological mysteries that humanity still questions. High in the Peruvian Andes, surrounded by cold mountain air and steep valleys carved by ancient rivers, the stone complex of Chavin de Huantar rests in silence. Mist drifts slowly across weathered walls blackened by time, while narrow passageways disappear into darkness beneath the earth. Even now, the site feels isolated from the modern world, as though it belongs to another reality entirely, one shaped by ritual, secrecy, and symbols no one fully understands. Built more than 3,000 years ago, around 900 BC, Chavin de Huantar became one of the most influential ceremonial centers in ancient South America. Long before the rise of the Inca civilization, pilgrims traveled through dangerous mountain routes to reach this sacred place. Archaeologists believe it served as both a religious and political center, uniting distant cultures through shared beliefs, ceremonies, and trade. Yet despite decades of study, many aspects of Chavin remain deeply mysterious. At the heart of the complex lies a labyrinth of underground galleries. These narrow stone corridors twist beneath massive temples with no natural light and almost no sense of direction. Some passages suddenly open into hidden chambers where carved granite figures emerge from the darkness. The most famous of them is the Lanzon, a towering stone monolith nearly 15 feet tall, engraved with the image of a terrifying deity possessing fangs, claws, and serpent-like hair. Its expression appears both human and animal, calm and violent at the same time. Why was it placed deep inside the structure, hidden from ordinary view? And what exactly happened inside these underground chambers? Researchers believe the priests of Chavin carefully designed the site to overwhelm the senses. Water channels running beneath the temple produced strange echoes that may have sounded like roaring animals during ceremonies. Conch shell trumpets discovered at the site could amplify sound through the tunnels, creating an atmosphere of fear and awe. Some scholars suggest participants may have consumed hallucinogenic plants during rituals, intensifying the experience even further. Entering the temple may have felt less like visiting a building and more like crossing into another state of consciousness. The architecture itself raises questions. The precision of the stonework, especially considering the era, remains impressive even today. Massive blocks were transported into the mountains without wheels or large draft animals. Intricate drainage systems controlled water flow beneath the temples with remarkable sophistication. During heavy rains, the channels transformed the structure into a living machine of sound and vibration. Was this purely symbolic engineering, or did the builders possess knowledge far ahead of their time? Some theories move beyond conventional archaeology. A number of researchers have pointed to the unusual imagery carved throughout the site. Hybrid beings with feline eyes, bird talons, and serpent features. Similar symbols appear in cultures separated by vast distances across the ancient Americas. Was this coincidence, cultural exchange, or evidence of a forgotten belief system stretching farther than historians once imagined? Others focus on the psychological effects of the temple itself. The dark tunnels, manipulated acoustics, and disorienting layout seem intentionally designed to alter human perception. Could Chavin de Huantar have functioned as an ancient initiation center, where spiritual transformation was achieved through fear, isolation, and sensory manipulation? Or was something even stranger taking place within those underground chambers? There are also lingering mysteries surrounding the decline of the site. By around 500 BC, the influence of Chavin began to fade. The ceremonial center was gradually abandoned, leaving behind its silent corridors and sacred carvings. No single catastrophic event explains its disappearance. The people simply moved on, and the mountains slowly reclaimed the complex. Today, visitors walking through the ruins often describe an unsettling atmosphere. The wind whistles through broken stone passages. Shadows gather inside the ancient galleries. And deep within the temple, the Lanzon still stands exactly where it was placed thousands of years ago, hidden in darkness as though waiting for something. Perhaps Chavin de Huantar was simply a masterpiece of ancient religion and engineering. Or perhaps it was part of a deeper tradition that modern history has only partially uncovered. In the thin mountain air of Peru, surrounded by silence and stone, the question remains difficult to ignore. What knowledge once existed here, and how much of it has been lost forever? And perhaps that is what makes ancient sacred sites so unsettling. Even when the stones remain standing, the beliefs, rituals, and intentions behind them often vanish into silence. Across continents separated by oceans and centuries, humanity has repeatedly carved meaning into mountains, caves, and cliffs, as though certain landscapes were believed to hold a connection between the earthly and the divine. Far from the high Andes of Peru, deep within the lush interior of Bali, another enigmatic sanctuary waits among jungle-covered valleys and flowing rivers. Hidden between rice terraces and tropical forests, the Gunung Kawi rock shrines emerge from the stone like monuments left behind by another age. The journey to the site begins with a descent. Hundreds of ancient steps lead downward through dense greenery where the air grows cooler and heavier with moisture. Palm trees sway above narrow paths, and the sound of running water echoes through the valley long before the shrines appear. Then, suddenly, the cliffs open beside the sacred Pacarisan River, revealing enormous carvings cut directly into the rock face itself. 10 towering shrines stand silently against the cliffs, each carved into the dark volcanic stone nearly 25 feet high. Their shapes resemble temple facades, complete with intricate architectural details, yet they are not buildings in the traditional sense. They are monuments sculpted into the mountain itself, stone doors leading nowhere, frozen entrances to something absent, or perhaps intentionally hidden. Historians believe the site dates back to the 11th century and was likely commissioned during the reign of King Anak Wungsu, a ruler associated with Bali's ancient Warmadawa dynasty. According to inscriptions found nearby, the shrines may have been dedicated to members of the royal family, serving as memorials or symbolic tombs honoring deceased kings and queens. But even this explanation leaves important questions unanswered. No human remains have ever been conclusively linked to the shrines. Unlike conventional burial sites, the carvings contain little internal space. They appear ceremonial rather than practical, symbolic rather than functional. If these monuments were truly royal memorials, why were they carved into sheer cliff walls overlooking a river deep within an isolated valley? Why create monuments so difficult to access? Some archaeologists point to the spiritual importance of water in Balinese Hindu tradition. Rivers were viewed as sacred pathways capable of connecting worlds, the living, the dead, and the divine. The location may have been chosen deliberately to place the shrines at a symbolic threshold between earthly existence and spiritual transition. Yet the deeper one looks at Gunung Kawi, the more unusual the site becomes. The precision required to carve these monuments directly into volcanic rock would have demanded extraordinary labor and planning. Ancient workers somehow shaped massive vertical surfaces with remarkable symmetry despite the limitations of their tools. Even today, The shrines appear almost impossibly smooth in certain sections, their proportions carefully aligned against the natural cliffside. How exactly was such work accomplished in a humid jungle valley nearly 1,000 years ago? The surrounding landscape adds another layer to the mystery. Hidden caves and meditation chambers are scattered throughout the area, some tucked behind vegetation and difficult to notice unless approached closely. Small niches carved into the stone suggest that monks or priests may once have lived here in isolation, devoting themselves to rituals and contemplation beside the river. There are also stories passed quietly through local traditions, stories that describe the valley not merely as a sacred place, but as a location infused with unusual spiritual energy. Some believe the cliffs themselves were chosen because they sat upon a powerful intersection of natural forces. Others speak of hidden chambers sealed behind the carvings, inaccessible passages concealed within the rock. No evidence has confirmed such claims. And yet, the atmosphere of Gunung Kawi makes speculation difficult to dismiss entirely. Unlike many archaeological sites overwhelmed by tourism or modern development, the valley retains an almost untouched stillness. Mist gathers across the stone in the early morning hours. Water flows endlessly through ancient channels carved beside the shrines. Moss spreads slowly across surfaces that have endured earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and centuries of tropical rain. The site feels less like a ruin and more like a place suspended outside ordinary time. Alternative interpretations, while not universally accepted, sometimes explore the idea of broader cultural exchanges across ancient trade networks. Others suggest that Alaka Hoyuk may represent a lost or transitional tradition, one that existed between well-documented civilizations, bridging gaps in historical continuity. In more speculative discussions, the site is occasionally linked to wider theories of symbolic diffusion, where shared human archetypes emerge independently or through long-forgotten contact routes. Yet these ideas remain open-ended, resting alongside the established archaeological framework rather than replacing it. The material evidence at Alaka Hoyuk does not speak in a single voice. Instead, it offers fragments, objects without full narratives, symbols without complete interpretation, and tombs that preserve the presence of lives once lived but not fully understood. Walking through the excavated layers today, one encounters a landscape that feels suspended between clarity and obscurity. Stone foundations outline ancient structures, while artifacts rest in museum displays, removed from their original context, yet still carrying an aura of mystery. The silence of the site is not empty. It is layered with questions that have survived longer than the people who first shaped them. Even the purpose of certain constructions remains partially unresolved. Were they purely funerary, or did they serve a wider ceremonial landscape that extended beyond the burial grounds? What meanings did the animal standards carry for those who created them? And how much of their worldview can still be recovered from objects shaped over 4 millennia ago? Alaka Hoyuk does not offer resolution. Instead, it preserves a sense of continuity between what is known and what remains just beyond reach. It stands as a reminder that early human societies were far more complex than simple timelines suggest, yet still partially obscured by the limits of surviving evidence. And so, the questions remain suspended in the stillness of the Anatolian plains, quiet, persistent, and unresolved. What other meanings lie embedded in these ancient forms, waiting for understanding that has yet to emerge? Can still be recovered from objects shaped over 4 millennia ago. Alaka Hoyuk does not offer resolution. Instead, it preserves a sense of continuity, and perhaps that is the pattern shared by so many ancient sacred places. Whether hidden in mountain valleys, carved into cliffs, or buried beneath jungle and stone, they seem to resist complete explanation. The physical structures survive, but the worldviews that created them fade into fragments, leaving behind monuments that still feel strangely alive with memory. Far from the humid forests of Bali, across the vast landscapes of southern Africa, another ancient site rises from the earth with an equally unsettling silence. Surrounded by dry grasslands and scattered granite hills, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe stand beneath the open sky like the remains of a forgotten kingdom that once commanded immense power. At sunrise, the stone walls glow with soft shades of gold and gray. Massive granite blocks curve across the landscape with astonishing precision, some rising more than 30 feet high. No mortar holds them together. No cement binds the stones. And yet, after more than 700 years, the walls still stand. The silence here feels different. Wind moves through narrow passageways between towering structures. Birds circle above ancient enclosures, and scattered across the ruins are traces of a civilization that flourished long before European colonization reached southern Africa, a civilization whose achievements were so advanced that early outsiders refused to believe local people could have built it. For centuries, Great Zimbabwe became the center of myth, speculation, and denial. Mainstream archaeology now identifies the site as the capital of a powerful African kingdom that thrived between the 11th and 15th centuries. At its height, Great Zimbabwe may have housed as many as 18,000 people and controlled major trade routes stretching across southeastern Africa to the Indian Ocean. Gold, ivory, copper, and exotic goods moved through the city, connecting it to distant regions including Persia, India, and China. Fragments of imported ceramics and glass beads found among the ruins confirm these long-distance connections. The kingdom was neither isolated nor primitive. It was wealthy, organized, and deeply influential. Yet despite these discoveries, many mysteries surrounding Great Zimbabwe remain unresolved. The most striking feature of the site is its architecture. The walls are built entirely from carefully stacked granite stones, some weighing hundreds of pounds each. The builders shaped and balanced them with extraordinary precision, creating smooth, curved surfaces without the use of mortar. Even modern engineers have studied the structures with admiration. How did ancient builders achieve such stability using only stone and human labor? The Great Enclosure, the largest structure at the site, remains especially enigmatic. Its outer wall stretches over 800 feet in circumference, enclosing a maze of narrow corridors and open spaces. Inside stands a massive conical tower nearly 30 feet high. The tower has no doorway, no windows, and no obvious practical function. What was it for? Some archaeologists believe it symbolized royal authority or represented a granary connected to agricultural prosperity. Others suggest it carried spiritual significance tied to fertility, ancestry, or sacred rituals. Yet no definitive explanation exists. The tower simply stands there in silence, smooth and sealed, as though guarding a meaning lost centuries ago. The layout of Great Zimbabwe raises further questions. Unlike many ancient cities built according to strict geometric plans, the structures here appear to flow organically with the surrounding landscape. Walls curve around granite boulders and natural rock formations, as though the builders were working with the terrain rather than against it. Certain elevated areas, especially the hill complex overlooking the valley below, seem to have held ceremonial importance. The hill complex itself may be the oldest section of the city. Perched atop a rocky hill, it contains narrow stone passages, hidden chambers, and elevated platforms with commanding views of the surrounding plains. Archaeologists believe elite rulers or spiritual leaders once occupied this area, but its exact purpose remains debated. Some local oral traditions describe the hill as a sacred place associated with ancestral spirits and communication with the unseen world. Even today, parts of Great Zimbabwe are regarded with deep cultural reverence by nearby communities. And then there are the birds. Among the most famous artifacts discovered at the site are 8 carved soapstone birds, unlike anything else found in African archaeology. Their forms combine human and avian characteristics, standing atop tall pedestals with expressions that appear strangely solemn and watchful. Scholars continue debating what they represent. Were they royal symbols, spiritual guardians, ancestor figures? The surrounding landscape adds further depth to the mystery. Orkney itself is rich with prehistoric remains, stone circles, burial mounds, and ritual sites that span thousands of years of human occupation. The Broch of Gurness exists within this broader archaeological tapestry, suggesting continuity between earlier Neolithic traditions and later Iron Age societies. Yet the exact nature of this continuity remains open to interpretation. Was it cultural inheritance, adaptation, or something more fragmented, where ideas survived even as communities transformed? Walking through the remains of the settlement today, one encounters a quiet tension between presence and absence. The outlines of houses still define living spaces, yet no voices remain within them. The central broch stands as a hollow structure, once filled with activity, now exposed to wind and sky. Even the sea nearby, constant and unchanging, seems to frame the site in a broader sense of time beyond human scale. Some of the most compelling questions arise not from what is preserved, but from what is missing. Why did Broch construction flourish in this region and then gradually disappear? What social or environmental shifts led to the decline of these fortified communities? And how much of their internal social structure, leadership, kinship, belief, can truly be reconstructed from stone alone? In more speculative interpretations, the Broch phenomenon has been seen as part of a wider cultural response to uncertainty in the ancient world. Others suggest that its architectural uniqueness reflects localized innovation rather than broader influence, shaped by geography and necessity rather than external contact. Yet no single explanation fully captures the complexity of the site or its architectural legacy. The Broch of Gurness remains, therefore, in a space between clarity and ambiguity. It is both a settlement and a structure, both familiar in its function and elusive in its deeper meaning. The stones preserve form, but not intention. They outline a way of life that can be partially reconstructed, yet never fully inhabited again. And as the Atlantic winds continue to move across Orkney's coastline, the Broch stands unchanged in its silence, holding within its walls the outline of a community that once was, and the unanswered question of what else might still be hidden within its enduring stone. Speculative interpretations, the Broch phenomenon has been seen as part of a wider cultural response to uncertainty in the ancient world. Others suggest that its architectural uniqueness reflects localized innovation rather than broader influence, shaped by geography and necessity rather than external contact. Yet no single explanation fully captures the complexity of the site or its architectural legacy. The Broch of Gurness remains, therefore, in a space between clarity and ambiguous settlement and a structure, both familiar in its function and elusive in its deeper meaning. The stones preserve form, but not intention. They outline a way of life that can be partially reconstructed, yet never fully inhabited again. And as the Atlantic winds continue to move across Orkney's coastline, the Broch stands unchanged in its silence, holding within its walls the outline of a community that once was, and the unanswered question of what else might still be hidden within its enduring stone. Speculative interpretations, the Broch phenomenon has been seen as part of a wider cultural response to uncertainty in the ancient world. Others suggest that its architectural uniqueness reflects localized innovation rather than broader influence, shaped by geography and necessity rather than external contact. Yet no single explanation fully captures the complexity of the site or its architectural legacy. The Broch of Gurness remains, therefore, in a space between clarity and ambiguous settlement and a structure, both familiar in its function and elusive in its deeper meaning. The stones preserve form, but not intention. They outline a way of life that can be partially reconstructed, yet never fully inhabited again. And as the Atlantic winds continue to move across Orkney's coastline, the Broch stands unchanged in its silence, holding within a community that once was, and the unanswered question of what else might still be hidden within its enduring stone. Speculative interpretations, the Broch phenomenon has been seen as part of a wider cultural response to uncertainty in the ancient world. Others suggest that its architectural uniqueness reflects localized innovator influence, shape necessity rather than external contact. Yet no single explanation fully captures the complexity of this, and as the camera slowly pulls away from the vast stone enclosures of Great Zimbabwe, the sense of human achievement lingers. Yet so does something more elusive, a question that repeats itself across continents and centuries. Why did ancient builders so often choose to move mountains of stone for reasons we can still only partially explain? From Africa's granite cities, the journey continues northward into the quiet hills of southern Iberia, where another monumental structure waits in silence, shaped not by imagination alone, but by forces we are still trying to understand. On a gentle rise overlooking the valley of Antequera in southern Spain stands the dolmen of Menga, known locally as Dolmen of Menga. At first glance, it appears almost unassuming against the landscape. An earthen mound, slightly sunken into the ground, with massive stone slabs forming a low, ancient silhouette. But as you approach, the scale begins to reveal itself slowly, almost reluctantly, as though the structure does not wish to fully disclose its presence at once. Then, the entrance comes into view. A rectangular opening framed by colossal stones leads into darkness beneath the mound. The passage is narrow, yet composed of limestone blocks so immense that their weight seems to defy not only human effort, but also expectation. Some of these stones weigh more than 150 tons. They are not simply placed. They are positioned with deliberate intent, aligned with a precision that becomes more striking the longer one stands before them. And beyond this entrance lies something even more remarkable. A long corridor stretches inward, gradually widening into a vast subterranean chamber formed by gigantic stone supports and capstones. The space is not natural. It is engineered, carefully, purposefully. The ceiling is composed of enormous slabs, some angled slightly, others resting horizontally across upright pillars that have held their position for nearly 6,000 years. There is a stillness inside the chamber that feels almost physical. Unlike many ancient sites that emphasize decoration or symbolic carvings, the dolmen of Menga is defined by mass and geometry. There are no elaborate reliefs, no painted narratives, no inscriptions to guide interpretation. Instead, there is stone, raw, immense, and arranged with a clarity of purpose that remains only partially understood. Archaeologists generally date the structure to around 3,700 to 3,600 BC, placing it among the oldest megalithic monuments in Europe. It belongs to a broader tradition of Neolithic dolmens found across the Iberian Peninsula, serving primarily as burial chambers or collective tombs. Excavations have confirmed human remains and artifacts associated with ritual funerary practices, suggesting that Menga was part of a wider spiritual landscape in which death, ancestry, and territory were deeply interconnected. Yet even within this framework, Menga stands apart. The scale of its construction is extraordinary. The largest slabs were transported from quarries located more than a kilometer away. Without wheels, metal tools, or draft animals capable of such loads, Neolithic builders would have relied on a combination of wooden rollers, sledges, manpower, and carefully prepared terrain. Still, the precision required to align and stabilize stones of such magnitude raises questions that continue to be discussed today. How many people would have been needed to move a single slab weighing over 100 tons? And how long would such a task have taken in a world without mechanized assistance? The interior chamber, known as the burial chamber, extends deep into the mound, supported by 3 massive upright stones on one side and 4 on the other. These orthostats hold up capstones that form a roof of extraordinary weight. Despite millennia of earthquakes, erosion, and shifting soil, the structure has remained remarkably intact. Some engineers and archaeologists have pointed out that the construction reflects a sophisticated understanding of load distribution and structural balance. The builders may not have had modern mathematics, but they clearly understood stability, weight, and geometry in practical terms. Still, practical explanations only go so far. One of the most intriguing aspects of the dolmen of Menga is its orientation. Unlike many prehistoric monuments in Europe that align with solar events such as solstices, Menga is not oriented toward the rising or setting sun. Instead, its axis points directly toward the nearby mountain known as Peña de los Enamorados. This is not a random alignment. The mountain itself carries deep cultural and symbolic significance. Its profile resembles a human face when viewed from certain angles, and local legends speak of tragic love stories and ancient spiritual meanings tied to its form. The dolmen appears deliberately oriented toward this natural feature, suggesting that the builders may have integrated the surrounding landscape into the monument's purpose. Was the mountain itself part of the ritual meaning of the site? Did the builders see it as a sacred entity, a marker of ancestral presence, or a symbolic gateway between worlds? Mainstream interpretations suggest that Menga functioned as a collective burial chamber used by Neolithic communities over multiple generations. The orientation toward Peña de los Enamorados may reflect cosmological beliefs or territorial symbolism, linking the dead with the surrounding environment and reinforcing the community's connection to the land. But the absence of decorative imagery or explicit ritual markers leaves space for alternative interpretations. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere changes subtly depending on light and time of day. When sunlight enters at certain angles, it filters through the entrance and traces faint lines across the stone surfaces, revealing textures that are otherwise invisible in darkness. At other times, the interior remains almost entirely shadowed, with only the faintest gradation of light near the entrance. Some researchers have suggested that the acoustic properties of the chamber may also have played a role in its use. Sound behaves differently within enclosed stone structures of this scale. A voice spoken inside can reverberate in ways that feel amplified or distorted, creating an auditory environment that might have enhanced ritual practices or ceremonial gatherings. Was the dolmen simply a place of burial, or did it also serve as a space where the boundary between the living and the dead was experienced through sound, light, and architecture? Fringe interpretations occasionally extend beyond conventional archaeology. A few speculative theories propose that the precision of the construction implies the existence of lost building knowledge transmitted across early Neolithic communities more widely than currently understood. Others suggest that Menga may represent part of a broader network of megalithic sites across Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, connected not through direct contact alone, but through shared symbolic systems that have since fragmented into isolated remnants. These ideas remain outside mainstream consensus, yet they persist in discussion due to the sheer scale and consistency of megalithic architecture across distant regions. There is also the question of purpose beyond burial. Why invest such immense labor into constructing a chamber that would be permanently sealed or rarely accessed? Some interpretations suggest that monuments like Menga were not designed solely for the dead, but for the living as well, serving as focal points for communal identity, seasonal rituals, or territorial claims. Others propose that the experience of entering the chamber itself, moving from daylight into enclosed darkness, may have symbolized a journey between states of existence. Step by step, descending into the earth, passing beneath stones that seemed to hold the weight of entire hills. Was this movement part of the meaning itself? Over time, the dolmen was eventually covered by an earthen mound, sealing the chamber and preserving it in a state of near-perfect isolation. Whether this was intentional closure or gradual accumulation remains debated, but the effect is the same. The structure was preserved as a hidden space within the landscape, its interior protected from centuries of external change. Today, as archaeologists carefully excavate and study the site, they uncover layers of soil, artifacts, and structural details that help reconstruct its history. Yet even with modern tools, many aspects remain uncertain. The full social context of its builders, their beliefs about death and the cosmos, and the precise rituals performed within its chamber are still partially obscured. And perhaps that is what makes the dolmen of Menga so compelling. It is not only the scale of the stones, nor the age of the monument, nor even the technical achievement required to construct it. It is the quiet persistence of unanswered questions, the sense that behind the physical structure lies a worldview that has not been fully recovered. Standing at the entrance today, looking into the darkened passage that leads beneath the mound, one is confronted with a space that feels both familiar and distant. A human-made structure, yet shaped by minds that experienced time, death, and landscape in ways we can only partially reconstruct. And as the wind moves across the valley outside, passing over the hills of Antequera and the distant silhouette of Peña de los Enamorados, a final thought lingers in the still air. What if the true meaning of Menga was never meant to be fully understood, but simply experienced? And what else might still be resting, hidden within the silence of the earth, waiting for its story to be uncovered? Some researchers suggest that the hearth may have functioned as a symbolic center of family life, representing continuity, ancestry, and connection between generations. Others propose that its placement reflects broader Neolithic cosmological ideas, where the home itself was seen as a microcosm of the world. Outside the houses, the settlement layout reveals even more complexity. Rather than being randomly arranged, the homes are connected through a network of stone passageways that allow movement between structures without fully exposing inhabitants to the harsh coastal environment. These passages create a sense of controlled circulation, almost like arteries linking the community together. Why was such a system necessary in a relatively small settlement? Was it purely defensive against the weather, or did it also reflect social organization, perhaps regulating interaction, privacy, or ritual movement within the village? The sea plays an important role in the identity of Skara Brae. Located near the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, the settlement sits in a landscape constantly shaped by wind, salt, and erosion. The proximity to the sea would have provided food resources such as fish and shellfish, and archaeological remains confirm that marine resources were an important part of the diet. But the sea also represents instability. Storms could reshape the coastline overnight. Sand could shift, burying or exposing entire structures, and it was likely this same force that eventually preserved Skara Brae, covering it in dunes that protected it for millennia. This dual nature of the environment, both sustaining and concealing life, adds another layer to the mystery of the settlement's abandonment. By around 2500 BC, Skara Brae was no longer occupied. The reasons for its abandonment remain uncertain. Some archaeologists suggest that changing climate conditions may have made life increasingly difficult, with shifting sand dunes encroaching on the settlement. Others point to possible social or economic changes that led communities to relocate inland. There is no evidence of sudden destruction, no signs of invasion or catastrophic collapse. Instead, the settlement appears to have been gradually left behind, its structures carefully emptied over time. Why would an entire community abandon such a carefully constructed place? And where did they go? The artifacts left behind provide only partial clues. Jewelry made from bone and stone suggests personal identity and craftsmanship. Decorated pottery hints at shared aesthetic traditions. Carved stone objects known as carved stone balls, found across Neolithic Scotland, remain one of the most debated artifact types in prehistoric archaeology. Their purpose is still unknown, ranging from ceremonial objects to status symbols, tools, or even forms of measurement. Their presence at Skara Brae connects the settlement to a wider cultural world, yet their meaning remains elusive. Some fringe interpretations propose that Skara Brae may have had significance beyond domestic life. The precision of its construction, the consistency of its layout, and its sheltered design have led some to speculate that it could have served ceremonial or seasonal purposes in addition to being a settlement. Others suggest that its architecture reflects an early understanding of environmental adaptation far more advanced than previously assumed for Neolithic societies in Northern Europe. There are also interpretations rooted in oral traditions from later Celtic cultures, which often describe ancient dwellings as places where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were thin. While these traditions are much later than Skara Brae itself, some researchers consider whether older beliefs about sacred landscapes may have influenced how such sites were used or remembered. Still, no definitive evidence confirms any of these ideas. What remains is structure, pattern, and silence. Even today, when walking through the reconstructed pathways of Skara Brae, there is a sensation that is difficult to articulate. The stone walls are low but enclosing. The rooms feel simultaneously familiar and distant. It is easy to imagine voices once echoing between the houses, the sound of fire crackling in hearths, the movement of daily life unfolding within a tightly connected community. And then the realization returns. None of this is visible anymore. Only stone remains. The village survived storms, shifting sands, and thousands of years of isolation beneath the dunes. Yet the people who built it left almost no written record. Their beliefs, their stories, their understanding of the world, all of it has been lost, except what can be inferred from the shapes they left behind. And so Skara Brae becomes something more than an archaeological site. It becomes a question preserved in stone. A question about how people lived in harmony with an environment so harsh, how they organized their lives within such tightly structured speech. Some researchers suggest that the hearth may have functioned as a symbolic center of family life, representing continuity, ancestry, and connection between generations. Others propose that its placement reflects broader Neolithic cosmological ideas, where the home itself was seen as a microcosm of the world. Outside the houses, the settlement layout reveals even more complexity. Rather than being randomly arranged, the homes are connected through a network of stone passageways that allow movement between structures without fully exposing inhabitants to the harsh coastal environment. These passages create a sense of controlled circulation, almost like arteries linking the community together. Why was such a system necessary in a relatively small settlement? Was it purely defensive against the weather, or did it also reflect social organization, perhaps regulating interaction, privacy, or ritual movement within the village? The sea plays an important role in the identity of Skara Brae. Located near the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, the settlement sits in a landscape constantly shaped by wind, salt, and erosion. The proximity to the sea would have provided food resources such as fish and shellfish, and archaeological remains confirm that marine resources were an important part of the diet. But the sea also represents instability. Storms could reshape the coastline overnight. Sand could shift, burying or exposing entire structures, and it was likely this same force that eventually preserved Skara Brae, covering it in dunes that protected it for millennia. This dual nature of the environment, both sustaining and concealing life, adds another layer to the mystery of the settlement's abandonment. By around 2500 BC, Skara Brae was no longer occupied. The reasons for its abandonment remain uncertain. Some archaeologists suggest that changing climate conditions may have made life increasingly difficult, with shifting sand dunes encroaching on the settlement. Others point to possible social or economic changes that led communities to relocate inland. There is no evidence of sudden destruction, no signs of invasion or catastrophic collapse. Instead, the settlement appears to have been gradually left behind, its structures carefully emptied over time. Why would an entire community abandon such a carefully constructed place? And where did they go? The artifacts left behind provide only partial clues. Jewelry made from bone and stone suggests personal identity and craftsmanship. Decorated pottery hints at shared aesthetic traditions. Carved stone objects known as carved stone balls, found across Neolithic Scotland, remain one of the most debated artifact types in prehistoric archaeology. Their purpose is still unknown, ranging from ceremonial objects to status symbols, tools, or even forms of measurement. Their presence at Skara Brae connects the settlement to a wider cultural world, yet their meaning remains elusive. Some fringe interpretations propose that Skara Brae may have had significance beyond domestic life. The precision of its construction, the consistency of its layout, and its sheltered design have led some to speculate that it could have served ceremonial or seasonal purposes in addition to being a settlement. Others suggest that its architecture reflects an early understanding of environmental adaptation far more advanced than previously assumed for Neolithic societies in Northern Europe. There are also interpretations rooted in oral traditions from later Celtic cultures, which often describe ancient dwellings as places where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were thin. While these traditions are much later than Skara Brae itself, some researchers consider whether older beliefs about sacred landscapes may have influenced how such sites were used or remembered. Still, no definitive evidence confirms any of these ideas. What remains is structure, pattern, and silence. Even today, when walking through the reconstructed pathways of Skara Brae, there is a sensation that is difficult to articulate. The stone walls are low but enclosing. The rooms feel simultaneously familiar and distant. It is easy to imagine voices once echoing between the houses, the sound of fire crackling in hearths, the movement of daily life unfolding within a tightly connected community. And then the realization returns. None of this is visible anymore. Only stone remains. The village survived storms, shifting sands, and thousands of years of isolation beneath the dunes. Yet the people who built it left almost no written record. Their beliefs, their stories, their understanding of the world, all of it has been lost, except what can be inferred from the shapes they left behind. And so Skara Brae becomes something more than an archaeological site. It becomes a question preserved in stone, a question about how people lived in harmony with an environment so harsh, how they organized their lives within such tightly structured And as the wind continues to sweep across the Orkney coastline, passing over the quiet stone outlines of Skara Brae, the sense of human presence begins to fade into something more distant, almost spectral. Another village once lived here. Another rhythm of daily life once filled these rooms. And yet, time has reduced it all to structure and silence. From these northern shores, the journey now moves south and west, across the Atlantic edge of Europe, toward a landscape where stone is not only used for shelter or settlement, but for something far more aligned with the sky itself. In the rolling green hills of eastern Ireland, a mound rises gently from the earth, unassuming at first glance, yet concealing one of the most precisely constructed prehistoric monuments in the world. This is Newgrange. From a distance, Newgrange appears almost natural, a large grass-covered hill blending seamlessly into the landscape of the Boyne Valley. Sheep graze across its surface. The wind moves softly over its curved shape. Only when you approach its entrance stone does the distinction between nature and construction become unmistakable. At the base of the mound, a narrow stone passage opens into darkness. The entrance is framed by a strikingly decorated facade of white quartz and granite, arranged in a deliberate pattern that still draws scholarly attention today. Spirals, geometric carvings, and abstract symbols are etched into the stone, markings whose meanings have never been definitively decoded. The entrance itself is small, almost understated, as if intentionally designed to require effort and humility to enter. And then, stepping inside, everything changes. A long, narrow passage stretches inward, constructed from massive stone slabs carefully aligned to form a corridor leading deep into the heart of the mound. The air becomes cooler. The sound of the outside world fades. And gradually, the structure reveals its true scale. This is not a simple burial mound. It is a precisely engineered stone monument, built more than 5,000 years ago, around 3,200 BC, making it older than both Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids of Giza. At the end of the passage lies a central chamber constructed in a cruciform shape. 3 alcoves arranged around a central space beneath a corbelled roof that rises upward in carefully overlapping stone layers. Despite its age, the structure remains watertight, stable, and remarkably intact. The engineering required to achieve this level of precision using Neolithic tools continues to surprise researchers. How did builders working with stone, bone, and wood achieve such architectural accuracy? And perhaps more intriguingly, why was such precision necessary for a structure that was never meant to be inhabited in a conventional sense? Archaeological evidence suggests that Newgrange functioned primarily as a ritual and ceremonial site, likely associated with burial practices and beliefs about death, rebirth, and the cosmos. Human remains and cremated bones discovered within the chamber indicate that it was used for funerary purposes, though not in the way modern tombs are understood. This was not a place of permanent burial, it was a place of passage. But passage toward what? The most famous feature of Newgrange is not its chamber, nor its passage, but its relationship with the sun. Every year, during the winter solstice, around December 21st, a remarkable event occurs. As the rising sun aligns perfectly with the entrance, a beam of light enters the passage and travels slowly inward, illuminating the inner chamber in a narrow path of golden light. For approximately 17 minutes, the darkness inside the mound is transformed as sunlight reaches the deepest part of the structure. This alignment is so precise that modern engineering studies confirm it could not have been accidental. The builders of Newgrange designed the monument with an extraordinary understanding of solar movement. But why the winter solstice specifically? In Neolithic societies, the winter solstice marked the turning point of the year, the longest night giving way to the gradual return of light. It symbolized survival, renewal, and continuity. In this context, Newgrange may have functioned as a monumental expression of cosmic order, aligning human ritual with celestial cycles. Still, even this explanation leaves room for deeper interpretation. Because Newgrange is not simply aligned with the sun, it is aligned with a specific moment of transformation, the precise instant when darkness begins to yield to light. Was this purely symbolic, or did it represent something more profound in the worldview of its builders? The exterior of the mound also raises questions. Originally, Newgrange would have been covered in white quartz, making it likely far more visually striking than it appears today. Some reconstructions suggest that the monument may have once gleamed in sunlight, standing out dramatically against the green landscape of the Boyne Valley. This reflective surface may have given it an almost otherworldly appearance, visible from a great distance. But the quartz stones were not naturally sourced nearby. They were transported from distant locations, requiring significant effort and coordination. Why invest such labor into materials chosen for visual effect rather than structural necessity? Some researchers suggest that the brightness of the quartz may have been intended to symbolize light itself, reinforcing the monument's connection to solar cycles. Others propose that the visual impact was meant to establish Newgrange as a sacred focal point within the landscape, a place where the boundary between earth and sky was intentionally emphasized. And then there are the carvings. The entrance stone is one of the most densely decorated megalithic stones in Europe. Spirals, lozenges, and concentric patterns cover its surface. These motifs are not unique to Newgrange. They appear across Neolithic sites in Ireland and beyond. Yet their meaning remains uncertain. Are they symbolic representations of natural cycles, sun, water, fertility, and movement? Or do they encode something more abstract, perhaps related to cosmology, memory, or ritual knowledge? Some speculative interpretations have suggested that the spiral motifs may represent concepts of time, continuity, or even altered states of perception experienced during ceremonial rituals. Others propose that they functioned as territorial or identity markers for Neolithic communities. No interpretation has been universally accepted. Inside the chamber, the acoustic properties of Newgrange add another layer of complexity. The stone surfaces create subtle echoes that amplify sound in unusual ways. Even a soft voice can feel transformed within the enclosed space, as if the structure itself participates in the act of communication. This has led some researchers to suggest that sound may have played a role in rituals conducted within the monument. Drumming, chanting, or spoken rituals could have interacted with the space in ways that intensified the experience of participants. Was Newgrange simply a passive structure for burial, or an active environment designed to shape perception? The question remains open. Beyond its physical structure, Newgrange also sits within a broader ritual landscape. The Boyne Valley contains numerous other prehistoric sites, forming a dense concentration of megalithic monuments. Some scholars propose that these sites may have been interconnected, forming a ceremonial complex aligned with both astronomical events and territorial organization. If true, this would suggest a level of cultural coordination across Neolithic Ireland that is still not fully understood. And yet, despite centuries of study, excavation, and interpretation, many aspects of Newgrange remain unresolved. Who exactly were the people who built it? What knowledge guided their precise alignment with the winter solstice? And how was such a monumental project organized in a society without written records or metal tools? Some fringe theories suggest that Newgrange may preserve knowledge inherited from even earlier traditions, possibly transmitted orally across generations long before its construction. Others propose that its astronomical precision reflects a deeper, now lost understanding of celestial cycles embedded within Neolithic cultures across Europe. Most archaeologists remain cautious about such ideas, emphasizing the ingenuity and observational skill of Neolithic societies themselves. Yet even within conventional explanations, the monument continues to challenge assumptions about prehistoric capabilities. There is also the question of continuity. Newgrange was not forgotten after its construction. It remained part of the cultural landscape for thousands of years, even as later populations built new monuments nearby. In some Irish mythological traditions, it is associated with ancient gods and otherworldly beings, described as a place where time behaves differently and where passage between worlds becomes possible. While these stories were recorded long after the monument was built, they reflect the enduring sense of mystery that surrounds it. Even today, visitors who enter the chamber during the solstice event describe the moment of illumination as something difficult to fully articulate. A brief encounter with light in a space defined by darkness. A carefully orchestrated alignment between earth and sky that feels both mathematical and symbolic at once. And yet, for all that is known about Newgrange, its full meaning present something more profound in the worldview of its builders? The exterior of the mound also raises questions. Originally, Newgrange would have been covered in white quartz, making it likely far more visually striking than it appears today. Some reconstructions suggest that the monument may have once gleamed in sunlight, standing out dramatically against the green landscape of the Boyne Valley. And as the winter light of Newgrange fades from the passageway, just as it has done for thousands of years, momentarily illuminating stone before retreating back into darkness, the narrative of ancient humanity shifts once again. From the quiet precision of Neolithic Ireland, the journey now moves far across the Atlantic, descending into the rugged highlands of South America, where stone is not only shaped by human hands, but also by a landscape that feels almost sculpted by intention itself. High above the valleys of eastern Bolivia, where the Andes begin to soften into Amazonian foothills, a massive sandstone outcrop rises abruptly from the earth. Weathered by wind and time, it appears at first like a natural formation, until its surface reveals something far more deliberate. This is El Fuerte de Samaipata. From a distance, the sight is almost deceptive. A broad ridge stretches across the mountaintop, its reddish stone exposed and smoothed in places, fractured in others. Vegetation clings to the edges, while clouds drift slowly over the summit, sometimes enveloping the entire formation in mist. But as one approaches, the illusion of natural randomness begins to dissolve. Carved into the bedrock is an immense and intricate network of channels, terraces, steps, niches, and geometric forms. Lines run across the surface in deliberate patterns. Basins are carved into stone as though designed to hold water or other substances. Rectangular recesses appear at measured intervals, their purpose no longer immediately clear. Unlike traditional fortresses built with walls rising upward, Samaipata is a fortress carved downward, etched directly into the mountain itself, and that alone sets it apart from almost every other archaeological site in the region. Archaeologists generally agree that El Fuerte de Samaipata is a multi-layered site, shaped by different cultures over centuries. The earliest phases are often attributed to pre-Inca societies, possibly the Mojocoya or Chane peoples, who may have first begun modifying the natural rock surface for ritual or communal purposes. Later, the Inca expanded the site during their southern expansion into the Andes, incorporating it into their broader administrative and ceremonial network. Finally, during the Spanish conquest in the 16th century, the site was briefly used as a defensive outpost, which is where the name El Fuerte, the fortress, originates. But despite this historical layering, the original purpose of the carved stone platform remains only partially understood. The most striking feature is the central carved zone, a vast rectangular surface filled with abstract geometric engravings, channels, and symmetrically arranged forms. These carvings stretch across the entire ridge, creating a surface that feels almost coded in its precision. Some sections resemble stylized animal shapes. Others appear purely geometric, composed of lines, spirals, and intersecting channels that seem to guide movement, of water, or perhaps something more symbolic. What was this space originally intended for? Mainstream interpretations suggest that the site had ceremonial and administrative functions. The carved basin systems may have been used in ritual water ceremonies, a practice deeply rooted in Andean cosmology, where water was not merely a resource, but a sacred force connected to life, fertility, and the mountain deities known as Apus. The Andes, in this worldview, are not inert geography. They are living entities. Mountains are believed to possess spirit, agency, and memory. Within this framework, Samaipata may have functioned as a ceremonial platform where human activity was aligned with natural and spiritual forces. The carved channels could have directed water during rituals, symbolizing purification, offerings, or communication with the natural world. yet even this interpretation only partially accounts for the scale and complexity of the carvings. The precision of the design is striking. Lines run in straight, parallel formations across uneven stone surfaces. Channels intersect at deliberate angles. Certain recesses appear too uniform to be purely decorative, yet their function remains uncertain. Some researchers have suggested astronomical alignments, though no definitive pattern has been universally confirmed. Could this site have encoded knowledge beyond ritual use? And if so, what kind of knowledge would require carving directly into the summit of a mountain? One of the most enigmatic features is known as the choir, a series of niches carved into the northern edge of the rock. These recesses vary in size but are arranged in a structured sequence. Their purpose is still debated. Some archaeologists believe they may have held ceremonial objects or offerings. Others suggest they could have served acoustic or symbolic functions. When wind passes through the formation, subtle sounds can be produced, shaped by the geometry of the rock itself. Was this intentional? Or is it a byproduct of design that ancient builders recognized and incorporated into ritual experience? Moving across the site, one encounters a long carved channel that runs diagonally across the platform. It appears to guide water flow from higher to lower sections of the rock. In a region where seasonal rains can be intense, such a system may have had practical importance in preventing erosion or managing runoff. But the integration of this drainage system into a broader pattern of symbolic carving suggests that function and meaning may not have been separate concepts here. In many Andean cultures, water was associated with fertility, transformation, and the continuity of life. It was also linked to the movement between worlds, earth, sky, and the spiritual realm. If Samaipata was a ceremonial center, then water flowing across its carved surface may have been understood not just physically, but symbolically, as movement between states of existence. And yet, there is something about the site that resists simple categorization. Unlike typical fortresses, there are no clear defensive walls. Unlike typical ceremonial centers, there are no preserved figurative carvings or inscriptions that explicitly describe mythological narratives. And unlike administrative centers, there is no clear structural hierarchy of buildings indicating long-term habitation. Instead, there is a vast open stone surface, carefully modified, but not fully defined in purpose. This ambiguity is part of what makes Samaipata so compelling. It is a place that seems to exist between categories, between fortress and temple, between natural landscape and engineered structure, between function and symbolism. As researchers continue to study the site, they face the challenge of interpreting a space that may have held multiple meanings simultaneously, shifting over time as different cultures adapted and reused it. The Inca, for example, are known to have integrated existing sacred sites into their own cosmology. Rather than erasing older traditions, they often incorporated them, reinterpreting their meaning within the broader structure of their empire. It is possible that Samaipata was transformed in this way, its earlier significance layered with new interpretations, never fully replaced, only recontextualized. Then came the Spanish conquest, which disrupted these systems entirely. Written records from the colonial period mention the site only briefly, describing it as a strategic location. The deeper ceremonial significance appears to have been largely overlooked or misunderstood by early European observers. As a result, much of the original context was filtered through layers of cultural discontinuity. Today, archaeologists and researchers continue to map, document, and analyze the carvings in detail. High-resolution scans reveal subtle variations in depth and tool marks, suggesting that multiple groups contributed to the site over extended periods. The consistency of certain geometric patterns, however, indicates a shared conceptual framework that persisted despite cultural change. But what that framework represented remains open to interpretation. Some speculative theories propose that Samaipata may have functioned as a kind of ritual map of cosmological beliefs, where carved lines and basins represented rivers, celestial paths, or spiritual journeys. Others suggest that the site could have been used in seasonal ceremonies tied to agricultural cycles, with water flow across the stone acting as a symbolic reenactment of life-giving forces descending from the mountains. There are also interpretations that emphasize its acoustic properties, proposing that the carved surfaces may have been used to amplify sound during ceremonies. In such a setting, ritual activity could have involved music, chanting, or spoken invocation interacting with the natural acoustics of the rock. None of these interpretations can be definitively proven, and perhaps that is part of the site's enduring power. Because even when stripped of speculation, what remains is extraordinary. A mountain transformed into a carved landscape of intentional design, shaped by human presence in ways that still challenge modern expectations of pre-Columbian engineering and symbolism. As the sun moves across the Bolivian sky today, shadows shift slowly across the engraved stone. Lines that once guided water now trace patterns of light and darkness. Niches that may once have held ritual objects now collect wind and dust, and the vast carved surface, exposed to centuries of weather, continues its quiet dialogue with the elements. Standing at the edge of the ridge, looking out over the valleys below, it becomes difficult to separate the natural from the constructed. The mountain feels both ancient and altered, as if it remembers being shaped. Speculative theories naturally arise in the face of such mysteries. Some researchers propose that Arslan Tepe served as an early ceremonial hub, a place where social hierarchy, ritual observance, and resource control intersected in ways that shaped the emergence of state-level societies. Others suggest that the advanced metallurgy, architectural precision, and symbolic artifacts indicate specialized knowledge that has since been lost to history. Could Arslan Tepe represent an early experiment in as the last shadows stretch across the adobe pyramids of Tucumay, the desert begins to cool, and the sense of layered civilizations, each built upon the memory of the one before it, lingers in the dry air. From the coastal valleys of northern Peru, the journey now turns northward again, crossing mountains and deserts until the landscape itself changes character. The dense ceremonial complexes of the Andes give way to a quieter, more open horizon, one defined not by towering stone or vast pyramids, but by remnants rising modestly from the earth, as if trying to remember what they once were. In the arid basin of central Arizona, where heat shimmers above the desert floor and distant mountains frame the horizon in muted blues, stands one of the most enigmatic architectural remnants of the ancient American Southwest, Casa Grande Ruins National Monument. At first glance, it appears almost fragile. A large earthen structure rises from the desert plain, its thick walls softened by centuries of wind, rain, and abandonment. The color of the adobe blends naturally with the surrounding soil, making it seem less like a constructed monument and more like an extension of the landscape itself. And yet, despite its weathered appearance, the structure still holds a quiet authority, an architectural presence that resists being overlooked. This is Casa Grande, Great House, a name given long after its builders had disappeared from historical memory. The main structure stands several stories high, with massive adobe walls that once supported a complex, multi-level building. Though the roof has long since collapsed, the remaining walls still reveal a carefully planned interior, rooms arranged in geometric order, aligned with a precision that suggests careful architectural planning rather than improvisation. But perhaps the most striking feature is not the structure itself, but what lies within its walls. Near the upper portion of the building, large rectangular openings are positioned in a deliberate configuration. These openings are not random. They are aligned with solar movements, particularly the seasonal cycles of the sun. At certain times of the year, sunlight passes through these apertures in precise patterns, illuminating specific interior surfaces. Was this intentional? Archaeologists generally attribute Casa Grande to the Hohokam culture, which flourished in the region between approximately 300 BC and 1450 AD. The Hohokam were skilled agricultural engineers, known for constructing extensive irrigation canal systems that transformed the desert into productive farmland. Their ability to manage water in such an arid environment remains one of the most impressive achievements of pre-Columbian North America. Casa Grande is believed to have been constructed around the 14th century AD, during the later phases of Hohokam civilization. Mainstream interpretations suggest that the structure functioned as a ceremonial or administrative center rather than a residential dwelling. Its scale, central location, and architectural features indicate that it may have served as a gathering place for ritual activity, social coordination, or astronomical observation. Yet even within this framework, many aspects remain open to interpretation. The building's orientation toward celestial movements suggests that the builders possessed a sophisticated understanding of solar cycles. The positioning of the openings in the upper walls allows sunlight to enter in a controlled manner during solstices and equinoxes, marking seasonal transitions with light rather than text or imagery. What did these moments of illumination represent to those who built and used this space? In many ancient agricultural societies, the movement of the sun was deeply tied to survival. Seasonal changes determined planting, harvesting, and water distribution. It is possible that Casa Grande functioned as a calendrical structure, helping communities track time in relation to agricultural cycles. But the precision of the alignment raises further questions. Was it purely functional, or did it also carry symbolic meaning, connecting human activity to cosmic order? The structure itself is made of caliche, a natural mixture of clay, sand, and calcium carbonate found in the desert soil. When moistened and shaped, it hardens into a durable building material capable of withstanding extreme heat. The Hohokam used this material to construct not only Casa Grande, but also extensive canal systems that stretched for miles across the landscape. These irrigation networks are often described as one of the most advanced prehistoric engineering systems in North America. Water was diverted from the nearby Gila and Salt rivers, distributed through carefully graded channels, and used to support agriculture in an otherwise harsh desert environment. The scale of coordination required for such a system suggests a high level of social organization and technical knowledge. Yet Casa Grande stands apart from these canals. It is not part of the irrigation system itself. It is separate, elevated in significance, if not in physical height. Why place such a monumental structure in a location slightly removed from the main agricultural infrastructure? Some researchers suggest that its position may have been symbolic, perhaps marking a central gathering point where communities converged during specific times of the year. Others propose that it served as a regional ceremonial hub, linking dispersed settlements through shared ritual practices. And then there is the question of its abandonment. By the time Spanish explorers arrived in the region in the 16th century, Casa Grande was already in ruins. The Hohokam civilization had largely disappeared several centuries earlier, leaving behind irrigation canals, pottery fragments, and architectural remains scattered across the desert. But what caused their decline remains uncertain. Some theories suggest environmental change, including prolonged droughts that may have disrupted agricultural systems. Others propose social or political fragmentation within Hohokam society, possibly triggered by resource scarcity or shifting trade networks. There is no evidence of a single catastrophic collapse. Instead, the decline appears gradual, an erosion of systems rather than a sudden end. Why would a society so skilled in managing water eventually abandon the very networks that sustained it? And where did its people go? Archaeology offers partial answers. Cultural continuity can be traced in later O'odham-speaking groups in the region, suggesting that Hohokam descendants may still live in the broader cultural landscape of the Southwest. But the transition between ancient Hohokam society and later indigenous cultures remains complex, shaped by migration, adaptation, and transformation over centuries. Casa Grande itself, however, was left behind. Over time, wind and rain eroded its upper levels, gradually collapsing its original structure. By the 19th century, when European American settlers encountered it, the building had already taken on the appearance of a monumental ruin, standing isolated in the desert like a silent witness to a forgotten past. Early interpretations varied widely. Some observers speculated that it might have been built by ancient civilizations far older than known Native American cultures. Others attributed it to external influences from distant regions of the world, reflecting a recurring tendency in early archaeology to seek explanations beyond local indigenous achievements. Modern research has firmly established its origins within the Hohokam cultural tradition. Yet the persistence of earlier speculative theories reveals something important, not about the site itself, but about how extraordinary it appeared to those encountering it without context. Because Casa Grande does not behave like a typical ruin, it feels deliberate, even in decay. The proportions of its rooms, the alignment of its openings, and the endurance of its adobe walls all suggest intention that goes beyond basic construction. Even partially collapsed, it retains a sense of design that invites interpretation. Inside the remaining structure, silence behaves differently. The thick adobe walls absorb sound, creating a muted atmosphere where external noise barely penetrates. Standing within what remains of the interior, one can still sense the architectural logic of the space. Rooms opening into one another, vertical movement implied by wall remnants, and directional orientation tied to the sun. It is not difficult to imagine the structure in its original form. Multiple levels rising above the desert floor, sunlight entering through carefully placed openings, shadows moving slowly across interior surfaces as the day progressed. But imagination only goes so far. What remains physically is incomplete, and what remains historically is fragmentary. Some experimental interpretations suggest that Casa Grande may have functioned as more than a ceremonial or astronomical structure. A few researchers have proposed that it could have been part of a broader network of ritual observation sites across the Southwest, connected through shared calendrical systems and cultural practices. Others have considered the possibility that its design reflects not only solar alignment, but also social organization, where architecture itself encoded hierarchy, movement, and communal interaction. However, none of these interpretations fully explain all aspects of the site, and perhaps they are not meant to, because Casa Grande resists being reduced to a single function or meaning. It exists at the intersection of environment, engineering, ritual, and time, each layer partially visible, none entirely complete. Today, the structure is protected as a national monument, surrounded by a modern shelter roof designed to preserve what remains of its fragile walls. Visitors walk quietly around it, observing the weathered surfaces, the openings aligned with the sky, and the enduring presence of a structure that has survived far longer than the civilization that built it. And yet, even in its protected state, Casa Grande does not feel fully contained. It feels like a question preserved in adobe, a question about how ancient peoples understood time, space, and survival in one of the harshest environments on the continent. A question about why certain places were chosen, built, abandoned, and remembered only in fragments. As the desert sun moves across the Arizona sky, casting long shadows over the ruins, one thought remains difficult to dismiss. Was Casa Grande simply a product of practical engineering and astronomical awareness? Or does it represent a deeper system of meaning within the Hohokam world that modern interpretation has only begun to reconstruct, stone by fragile stone, shadow by shifting shadow across the silent desert floor? From certain vantage points, the alignment of the pyramids appears to interact with the surrounding hills in subtle ways. Some researchers have suggested that specific structures may have been oriented toward prominent peaks or celestial events, though interpretations vary and no universal alignment pattern has been definitively confirmed. Still, the idea that Tukume was designed in dialogue with its environment continues to shape ongoing research. Why build a vast ceremonial center in a valley surrounded by desert and foothills, where visibility extends outward toward distant natural landmarks? Was the placement purely strategic, or did the landscape itself hold symbolic significance? Within the pyramids, archaeological excavations have revealed burial sites that add another layer of complexity. Human remains have been discovered alongside offerings such as ceramics, textiles, metal objects, and animal sacrifices. These burials suggest that Tukume was not only a political and administrative center, but also a place deeply connected to funerary and ritual practices. Some tombs appear to belong to elite individuals, possibly rulers or high-ranking priests. Others are more modest, indicating a broader social spectrum of burial practices within the site. Yet the relationship between the living spaces and burial areas is not always clearly defined. In some cases, tombs are located within or beneath construction phases of pyramids, suggesting that structures were repeatedly modified to accommodate new ritual requirements over time. Was Tukume conceived as a city of the living, the dead, or something that blurred the boundary between both? Another layer of intrigue comes from the site's defensive and administrative characteristics. Unlike purely ceremonial complexes, Tukume shows evidence of organized storage systems, controlled access points, and spatial hierarchies that suggest governance and resource management. Agricultural goods, textiles, and craft production likely passed through its networks, linking the site to regional trade and redistribution systems. Yet it does not present itself as a typical fortified city. There are no massive defensive walls encircling the entire complex. Instead, authority seems embedded within architecture itself, expressed through scale, elevation, and spatial restriction rather than overt military design. This raises further questions about how power was structured in this society. Was control maintained through physical force, or through ritual and ideological systems embedded within the pyramids themselves? As with many ancient Andean sites, symbolism may have played a central role. Some researchers suggest that the pyramids of Tukume may represent sacred mountains constructed in adobe form, a human attempt to recreate and inhabit the cosmological structure of the Andes. In this interpretation, each pyramid could function as an artificial hill, aligning human-built space with the sacred geography of the natural world. Others propose that the pyramids reflect a cosmological map, encoding relationships between earth, water, sky, and ancestral lineage. Still others emphasize their practical administrative function, arguing that symbolism and governance were inseparable in Andean societies, where ritual authority legitimized political control. Fringe interpretations occasionally extend beyond these frameworks. A few speculative theories suggest that the uniformity and scale of adobe construction across multiple Andean cultures may reflect shared architectural knowledge transmitted over long distances, possibly through cultural exchange networks that are still not fully mapped. Others propose that certain geometric patterns found in pyramid layouts may encode astronomical or calendrical information, though evidence remains inconclusive. Most archaeologists remain cautious, emphasizing the well-documented cultural evolution of the Lambayeque, Chimu, and Inca civilizations as sufficient explanation for the site's development. Yet even within this framework, Tukume retains an element of ambiguity, because while the sequence of construction phases is increasingly well understood, the lived experience of the site, the sounds, movements, ceremonies, and meanings, remains largely inaccessible. Standing among the ruins today, the sense of scale is softened by time. Wind moves across the desert, carrying dust between collapsed walls. The pyramids no longer rise in sharp definition, but instead appear as vast earth forms returning slowly to the landscape from which they were shaped. Excavated sections reveal internal chambers exposed to light for the first time in centuries, their walls still holding faint traces of human activity. And yet, even in this partially revealed state, the site feels incomplete, not physically, but interpretively. What remains missing is not the structure itself, but the full understanding of why it was built in this way, and how its meaning shifted across centuries. From certain vantage points, the alignment of the pyramids appears to interact with the surrounding hills in subtle ways. Some researchers have suggested that specific structures may have been oriented toward prominent peaks or celestial events, though interpretations vary and no universal alignment pattern has been definitively confirmed. Still, the idea that Tukume was designed in dialogue with its environment continues to shape ongoing research. Why build a vast ceremonial center in a valley surrounded by desert and foothills, where visibility extends outward toward distant natural landmarks? Was the placement purely strategic, or did the landscape itself hold symbolic significance? Within the pyramids, archaeological excavations have revealed burial sites that add another layer of complexity. Human remains have been discovered alongside offerings such as ceramics, textiles, metal objects, and animal sacrifices. These burials suggest that Tukume was not only a political and administrative center, but also a place deeply connected to funerary and ritual practices. Some tombs appear to belong to elite individuals, possibly rulers or high-ranking priests. Others are more modest, indicating a broader social spectrum of burial practices within the site. Yet the relationship between the living spaces and burial areas is not always clearly defined. In some cases, tombs are located within or beneath construction phases of pyramids, suggesting that structures were repeatedly modified to accommodate new ritual requirements over time. Was Tukume conceived as a city of the living, the dead, or something that blurred the boundary between both? Another layer of intrigue comes from the site's defensive and administrative characteristics. Unlike purely ceremonial complexes, Tukume shows evidence of organized storage systems, controlled access points, and spatial hierarchies that suggest governance and resource management. Agricultural goods, textiles, and craft production likely passed through its networks, linking the site to regional trade and redistribution systems. Yet it does not present itself as a typical fortified city. There are no massive defensive walls encircling the entire complex. Instead, authority seems embedded within architecture itself, expressed through scale, elevation, and spatial restriction rather than overt military design. This raises further questions about how power was structured in this society. Was control maintained through physical force, or through ritual and ideological systems embedded within the pyramids themselves? As with many ancient Andean sites, symbolism may have played a central role. Some researchers suggest that the pyramids of Tukume may represent sacred mountains constructed in adobe form, a human attempt to recreate and inhabit the cosmological structure of the Andes. In this interpretation, each pyramid could function as an artificial hill, aligning human-built space with the sacred geography of the natural world. Others propose that the pyramids reflect a cosmological map, encoding relationships between earth, water, sky, and ancestral lineage. Still others emphasize their practical administrative function, arguing that symbolism and governance were inseparable in Andean societies, where ritual authority legitimized political control. Fringe interpretations occasionally extend beyond these frameworks. A few speculative theories suggest that the uniformity and scale of adobe construction across multiple Andean cultures may reflect shared architectural knowledge transmitted over long distances, possibly through cultural exchange networks that are still not fully mapped. Others propose that certain geometric patterns found in pyramid layouts may encode astronomical or calendrical information, though evidence remains inconclusive. Most archaeologists remain cautious, emphasizing the well-documented cultural evolution of the Lambayeque, Chimu, and Inca civilizations as sufficient explanation for the site's development. Yet even within this framework, Tucumay retains an element of ambiguity, because while the sequence of construction phases is increasingly well understood, the lived experience of the site, the sounds, movements, ceremonies, and meanings, remains largely inaccessible. Standing among the ruins today, the sense of scale is softened by time. Wind moves across the desert, carrying dust between collapsed walls. The pyramids no longer rise in sharp definition, but instead appear as vast earth forms returning slowly to the landscape from which they were shaped. Excavated sections reveal internal chambers exposed to light for the first time in centuries, their walls still holding faint traces of human activity. And yet, even in this partially revealed state, the site feels incomplete, not physically, but interpretively. What remains missing is not the structure itself, but the full understanding of why it was built in this way, and how its meaning shifted across centuries. Water was diverted from the nearby Gila and Salt rivers, distributed through carefully graded channels, and used to support agriculture in an otherwise harsh desert environment. The scale of coordination required for such a system suggests a high level of social organization and technical knowledge. Yet Casa Grande stands apart from these canals. It is not part of the irrigation system itself. It is separate, elevated in significance, if not in physical height. Why place such a monumental structure in a location slightly removed from the main agricultural infrastructure? Some researchers suggest that its position may have been symbolic, perhaps marking a central gathering point where communities converged during specific times of the year. Others propose that it served as a regional ceremonial hub, linking dispersed settlements through shared ritual practices. And then there is the question of its abandonment. By the time Spanish explorers arrived in the region in the 16th century, Casa Grande was already in ruins. The Hohokam civilization had largely disappeared several centuries earlier, leaving behind irrigation canals, pottery fragments, and architectural remains scattered across the desert. But what caused their decline remains uncertain. Some theories suggest environmental change, including prolonged droughts that may have disrupted agricultural systems. Others propose social or political fragmentation within Hohokam society, possibly triggered by resource scarcity or shifting trade networks. There is no evidence of a single catastrophic collapse. Instead, the decline appears gradual, an erosion of systems rather than a sudden end. Why would a society so skilled in managing water eventually abandon the very networks that sustained it? And where did its people go? Archaeology offers partial answers. Cultural continuity can be traced in later O'odham-speaking groups in the region, suggesting that Hohokam descendants may still live in the broader cultural landscape of the Southwest. But the transition between ancient Hohokam society and later indigenous cultures remains complex, shaped by migration, adaptation, and transformation over centuries. Casa Grande itself, however, was left behind. Over time, wind and rain eroded its upper levels, gradually collapsing its original structure. By the 19th century, when European American settlers encountered it, the building had already taken on the appearance of a monumental ruin, standing isolated in the desert like a silent witness to a forgotten past. Early interpretations varied widely. Some observers speculated that it might have been built by ancient civilizations far older than known Native American cultures. Others attributed it to external influences from distant regions of the world, reflecting a recurring tendency in early archaeology to seek explanations beyond local indigenous achievements. Modern research has firmly established its origins within the Hohokam cultural tradition. Yet the persistence of earlier speculative theories reveals something important, not about the site itself, but about how extraordinary it appeared to those encountering it without context. Because Casa Grande does not behave like a typical ruin. It feels deliberate, even in decay. The proportions of its rooms, the alignment of its openings, and the endurance of its adobe walls all suggest intention that goes beyond basic construction. Even partially collapsed, it retains a sense of design that invites interpretation. Inside the remaining structure, silence behaves differently. The thick adobe walls absorb sound, creating a muted atmosphere where external noise barely penetrates. Standing within what remains of the interior, one can still sense the architectural logic of the space. Rooms opening into one another, vertical movement implied by wall remnants, and directional orientation tied to the sun. It is not difficult to imagine the structure in its original form. Multiple levels rising above the desert floor, sunlight entering through carefully placed openings, shadows moving slowly across interior surfaces as the day progressed. But imagination only goes so far. What remains physically is incomplete, and what remains historically is fragmentary. Some experimental interpretations suggest that Casa Grande may have functioned as more than a ceremonial or astronomical structure. A few researchers have proposed that it could have been part of a broader network of ritual observation sites across the Southwest, connected through shared calendrical systems and cultural practices. Others have considered the possibility that its design reflects not only solar alignment, but also social organization, where architecture itself encoded hierarchy, movement, and communal interaction. However, none of these interpretations fully explain all aspects of the site. As the last light fades over the Arizona desert and the adobe walls of Casa Grande cast long, thinning shadows across the arid ground, the silence once again becomes the dominant presence. A structure built to track the sun now stands beneath the same sky it once measured, its openings still aligned with celestial rhythm, even as the civilization that created it has long since disappeared into history. From this quiet desert basin, the journey shifts across the Pacific, far beyond the American Southwest, beyond the Andes, beyond the ancient stone cultures of the Americas, toward the humid volcanic landscapes of Southeast Asia. Here, in a region shaped by earthquakes, dense jungle, and shifting earth, another ancient formation rises into view. Unlike the adobe towers of the desert or the pyramids of coastal Peru, this site appears at first like a natural hill. But it is not. This is Gunung Padang megalithic site, and what lies here continues to challenge the boundaries between archaeology, geology, and interpretation. From a distance, Gunung Padang looks like a stepped volcanic hill covered in thick vegetation. Mist rolls across its slopes in the early morning, and the surrounding landscape feels untouched, almost untouched by human history. But as one approaches the site, stone begins to reveal itself beneath the greenery, carefully placed blocks forming terraces that climb upward in a deliberate geometric pattern. This is not a single structure. It is a layered formation, a terraced complex rising in stages, each level constructed from massive basalt columns arranged in precise alignment. The higher one climbs, the more the natural landscape seems replaced by intentional design. Stone platforms emerge from the earth, connected by stairways and retaining walls, as though the hill itself has been reshaped into architecture. And then comes the realization that defines Gunung Padang's mystery. It is not only what is visible that matters, but what lies beneath. Archaeological investigations have revealed that the visible megalithic terraces are only the uppermost layer of a far more complex structure. Beneath the surface, multiple subsurface layers have been identified through geophysical surveys, suggesting a sequence of construction phases extending deep into the hill. Some studies have proposed that these lower layers may contain artificial chambers, stone alignments, and compacted structures that extend far below the visible terraces. If confirmed, this would make Gunung Padang not simply a megalithic site, but a multi-layered construction spanning vast periods of time. Mainstream archaeology generally attributes the visible upper terraces to megalithic builders from around 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, possibly associated with early Austronesian cultural groups in the region. These communities are known to have constructed stone platforms, ceremonial spaces, and ritual landscapes across Indonesia and the broader Southeast Asian archipelago. The uppermost level of Gunung Padang fits within this tradition. Large basalt columns arranged in horizontal formations, creating terraces that likely served ceremonial or communal purposes. But it is the deeper layers that have sparked ongoing debate. Geophysical surveys conducted by Indonesian researchers have suggested the presence of more complex subsurface structures, rectangular formations, denser stone arrangements, and possible engineered spaces that appear distinct from natural geological formations. Some interpretations propose that these deeper layers could represent earlier construction phases, potentially extending thousands of years further back than previously thought. If accurate, this would push the origins of human activity at Gunung Padang into an unexpectedly ancient time frame. But this interpretation remains highly debated. Geologists and archaeologists caution that natural processes, such as volcanic activity, cooling lava formations, and sediment compression, can sometimes create patterns that resemble human construction when viewed through geophysical imaging. Distinguishing between natural geological layering and intentional architecture is not always straightforward, especially in a volcanically active region like West Java. So the question remains open. How much of what lies beneath Gunung Padang is human-made, and how much is shaped by the earth itself? As one ascends the terraces, the atmosphere changes. The jungle sound softens, replaced by wind moving through stone and leaves. The basalt columns, some shaped into hexagonal or angular forms, create a rhythmic visual pattern that feels almost organized, even when partially eroded. The climb is steep in places, requiring careful movement between uneven stone platforms that appear to have been placed with both functional and symbolic intent. Why build upward through terraces rather than constructing a separate monumental structure? Was the hill chosen because of its natural form, or was the hill itself modified over generations to become something else entirely? Some interpretations suggest that Gunung Padang represents a form of landscape architecture deeply rooted in Austronesian cosmology. In many traditional belief systems across Southeast Asia, hills and mountains are not merely physical features. They are living entities, often associated with ancestors, spirits, or cosmic order. In this context, shaping a hill into a structured, terraced formation may have been an act of transformation rather than construction, a way of revealing or enhancing something already present within the landscape. But even this interpretation does not fully account for the scale of what lies beneath. If subsurface structures are indeed artificial, as some studies propose, then Gunung Padang may represent a site with multiple chronological layers, each reflecting different phases of human interaction with the hill over long periods of time. Some researchers have suggested that older structures could have been buried intentionally, either through ritual closure or natural sedimentation, and later built upon by successive cultures. Others argue that such interpretations stretch beyond what current evidence can support. The debate remains unresolved, and it is precisely this uncertainty that continues to draw attention to the site. One of the most intriguing aspects of Gunung Padang is its lack of clear inscription or figurative representation. Unlike many ancient sites that depict deities, rulers, or mythological scenes, Gunung Padang offers very little in the way of explicit symbolic imagery. The stonework is geometric, structural, and abstract. This absence of narrative imagery raises another question. Was meaning expressed through form rather than depiction? Was the arrangement of terraces, steps, and stone alignments itself the message? As research continues, scientists employ increasingly advanced methods to study the site. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and core sampling have all been used to investigate the subsurface layers. Some results suggest variations in density and structure that may indicate human modification. Others remain inconclusive, leaving room for competing interpretations. What is clear, however, is that Gunung Padang is not a simple hilltop ruin. It is a complex formation, geological, cultural, and possibly chronological in ways that are still being explored. Local traditions also add another dimension to the site's identity. In Sundanese cultural memory, Gunung Padang is often associated with ancient kingdoms and legendary figures, sometimes described as a place of spiritual significance long before written history. While such traditions cannot be treated as direct archaeological evidence, they reflect the long-standing cultural awareness of the site's importance. Even today, the hill is regarded by some as a place of spiritual energy or ancestral presence, and whether interpreted through archaeology or oral tradition, the sense of significance is difficult to ignore. As dusk settles over West Java, the terraces of Gunung Padang take on a different character. Shadows lengthen across the stone steps, and the geometry of the site becomes more pronounced in the fading light. Mist gathers once again around the lower slopes, slowly obscuring the boundary between constructed form and natural terrain. From this perspective, it becomes difficult to distinguish where the mountain ends and the monument begins. And perhaps that is where the mystery quietly resides. Not in a single buried chamber or hidden artifact, but in the relationship between human intention and the landscape itself. Because even after years of study, debate, and excavation, Gunung Padang continues to resist a single definitive explanation. It remains layered not only in stone, but in interpretation, each layer revealing something new while concealing something deeper still. And so the question lingers, echoing across the terraces, the jungle, and the volcanic earth beneath. Was Gunung Padang a carefully constructed megalithic monument built over many generations? Or does it preserve traces of an even older interaction between humanity and landscape that we are only beginning to recognize, still buried within the silent layers of the hill? Yet beyond the scientific debate, Gunung Padang raises a quieter and perhaps more enduring question about how ancient societies understood permanence. Many monumental sites around the world were built to stand apart from nature, to dominate it or impose order upon it. But Gunung Padang feels different. Its terraces do not seem to separate themselves from the mountain. Instead, they follow its contours, adapting to the slope rather than erasing it. This subtle relationship suggests a philosophy in which construction was not an act of conquest over the landscape, but a negotiation with it. Such an approach invites comparison with other ancient ceremonial sites where elevation carried symbolic meaning. Across many early cultures, high places served as thresholds, spaces believed to exist between the earthly and the unseen. Mountains, ridges, and volcanic hills were often regarded not merely as geographic features, but as sacred centers where communication with ancestors or spiritual forces became possible. In this context, Gunung Padang's ascending terraces may have represented more than architecture. They may have formed a ritual journey, a gradual movement upward through levels of meaning and belief. And yet, despite these possibilities, the physical evidence remains complex. Excavations have uncovered layers of volcanic deposits intertwined with arranged stonework, creating a geological puzzle that is not easily separated into natural and artificial categories. Some formations appear unmistakably deliberate, while others remain open to interpretation. This mixture complicates every attempt to define the site within familiar archaeological boundaries. Is Gunung Padang best understood as a monument, a modified natural formation, or something that exists between those categories? the uncertainty surrounding chronology only deepens this sense of mystery. If different phases of construction or modification occurred over long stretches of time, then the hill may not represent the vision of a single culture or generation. Instead, it could embody centuries of memory and renewal, a place revisited, reshaped, and reinterpreted by successive communities, each leaving traces upon the work of those who came before. Such continuity would transform Gunung Padang from a fixed monument into an evolving sacred landscape. There is also the matter of what remains concealed. Much of the hill still lies unexplored beneath layers of soil and volcanic material. Future research may reveal chambers, retaining systems, or entirely new patterns of construction, or it may reinforce more conservative interpretations rooted in geology and surface archaeology. For now, the unanswered questions remain suspended between possibility and restraint, reminding us that archaeological understanding is rarely final. And so Gunung Padang endures not only as a site of stone and earth, but as a meeting point between evidence and imagination. The terraces remain silent beneath shifting clouds and mountain winds, offering no final declaration about their origin or purpose. Perhaps that silence is why the hill continues to hold such fascination. Because somewhere beneath the volcanic soil and layered interpretations, the deeper story of Gunung Padang may still be waiting, hidden not only beneath the earth, but within the questions we have yet to ask. Beyond the towering columns of Karnak, beyond the sandstone corridors where kings carved their prayers into eternity, another mystery waits in a landscape very different from the Nile. Here, there are no colossal temples or ceremonial avenues, no forests of stone rising toward the sky. Instead, the mystery lies scattered across the dry earth itself, smaller, quieter, and perhaps for that reason, no less unsettling. Along the southern coast of Peru, where desert plains stretch beneath pale skies and the wind carries dust through narrow valleys, the land around Ica appears ancient in a way that feels almost suspended outside ordinary time. The desert is harsh here. Rock and sand dominate the horizon. Sparse vegetation clings to life between sunburned ridges. Ancient burial grounds, weathered hills, and forgotten settlements rest beneath layers of drifting earth. For thousands of years, civilizations flourished and vanished across this region. Paracas, Nazca, Chincha, and others whose histories survive only in fragments. And somewhere within this landscape emerged one of archaeology's most controversial collections, the Ica stones. At first glance, they appear unremarkable. Dark and smooth, many are rounded and volcanic in origin, composed primarily of andesite. Some fit easily into the palm of a hand. Others are larger, weighing several pounds. Their surfaces bear engraved images, carefully etched scenes of people, animals, symbols, and activities. But it is not the stones themselves that have inspired decades of fascination. It is what appears to be carved upon them. Human figures performing surgeries, astronomical observations, maps, and perhaps most famously of all, images resembling dinosaurs. Thousands of stones have been reported, their number varying depending on the source. Some accounts describe collections of several thousand. Others suggest tens of thousands may exist, dispersed among private owners, museums, and local communities. The question surrounding the Ica stones is not merely what they depict. It is whether they are ancient at all. And like many enduring mysteries, the story begins not with certainty, but with fragments. Long before international attention arrived, local farmers in the Ica region reportedly encountered engraved stones while working the land or exploring ancient burial sites. Peru's deserts preserve artifacts remarkably well, and tomb robbing, known locally as huacaria, had long exposed objects from ancient graves. Engraved stones were not entirely unknown in Peru. Archaeologists have documented decorated stones associated with various cultures, including symbolic carvings and ritual objects. The Andean world possessed rich artistic traditions, often encoding mythology, cosmology, and social life into portable forms. But the Ica stones seemed different. Their imagery was unusually elaborate and increasingly difficult to explain. The figure most closely associated with the stones was Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquea, a Peruvian physician and local scholar who became deeply invested in collecting and studying them during the 1960s. According to Cabrera, his interest began after receiving an engraved stone as a gift. What he saw disturbed and fascinated him. The stone appeared to depict a fish species believed extinct for millions of years. Soon, Cabrera began acquiring more. His collection expanded rapidly, eventually numbering in the thousands. He established a museum in Ica devoted to their preservation and interpretation. To visitors entering those rooms, the effect could be overwhelming. Rows upon rows of dark stones, some small and simple, others intricately carved with scenes that seemed to challenge accepted chronology. One stone might show geometric patterns or stylized animals consistent with known ancient art. Another might depict what appeared to be human figures using telescopes or examining celestial bodies. Yet another seemed to portray complex medical procedures, blood transfusions, organ transplants, even operations involving the brain. And then there were the dinosaurs, long-necked creatures, horned reptiles, predatory animals resembling theropods. Humans appeared beside them, sometimes riding them, hunting them, or interacting with them in ways difficult to reconcile with conventional history. If genuine and ancient, such images would imply something extraordinary. But extraordinary claims, as history repeatedly reminds us, invite careful scrutiny. Mainstream archaeology approaches the Ica stones with profound skepticism. The reasons are numerous. Perhaps most significant is the problem of provenance. In archaeology, context matters almost as much as the artifact itself. An object discovered during controlled excavation carries a traceable history. Its location, surrounding materials, depth, and relationship to other evidence help establish authenticity and age. The majority of Ica stones lack this context. Many entered collections through private acquisition or local discovery rather than formal excavation. Without secure archaeological documentation, determining their age becomes far more difficult. And that difficulty opened the door to controversy. During the late 1960s and 1970s, attention surrounding the stones intensified. Newspapers, television programs, and alternative researchers began discussing their implications. Some presented them as evidence of lost civilizations possessing advanced knowledge. Others suggested forgotten chapters of human history had somehow survived in carved stone. But amid growing fascination came troubling revelations. One local farmer, Basilio Ushuya, became central to the debate. Ushuya admitted to producing engraved stones himself. According to his statements, he created them using simple tools and sold them to tourists and collectors. He described copying images from magazines, textbooks, and popular media, artificially aging the stones using methods involving manure and heat. To many researchers, this confession appeared decisive. The mystery, they argued, had been solved. The Ica stones were modern fabrications. Case closed. And yet, as often happens with controversial discoveries, closure proved elusive. Questions remained. Supporters of the stone's authenticity noted that Ushuya's admissions were not entirely consistent over time. In some interviews, he acknowledged producing stones specifically for sale, while implying that older engraved examples already existed. In other accounts, his statements appeared shaped by legal pressures connected to Peru's antiquities laws. Could one man have created thousands of carvings? Were all of them modern? Or only some? The uncertainty lingered. Examining the stones themselves reveals why debate continues. Certain engravings display surprising intricacy. Scenes wrap carefully across curved surfaces. Lines vary in depth and style. Some stones exhibit wear or patination, the thin, weathered layer that develops over long periods. Here, interpretation becomes complicated. Proponents of authenticity argue that certain surface characteristics suggest considerable age. They point to microscopic analyses claiming evidence of oxidation or weathering within engraved lines. Skeptics counter that patina can be misleading, particularly in desert environments where chemical processes and artificial treatments may produce deceptive appearances. The science, while informative, has not settled every question. Unlike organic material, stone itself cannot be directly radiocarbon dated. Researchers instead analyze surface conditions, tool marks, and archaeological context. And context, once again, remains the central challenge. The dinosaur imagery occupies a particularly curious place within the discussion. Mainstream interpretations typically view these carvings as modern creations inspired by 20th century knowledge and popular culture. By the time many stones emerged publicly, dinosaur imagery had become widespread through books, museums, and media. From this perspective, the explanation appears straightforward. Ancient Peruvians did not coexist with dinosaurs separated from them by tens of millions of years. The carvings reflect modern imagination rather than prehistoric memory. Yet even here, advocates of alternative interpretations raise questions. Some argue that certain dinosaur depictions appear anatomically detailed in ways supposedly inconsistent with older 20th century reconstructions. They point to features like posture, skin patterns, or anatomical traits, suggesting the engravers possessed knowledge unavailable when the stones were allegedly produced. Critics respond that dinosaur imagery evolved through popular illustration, and retrospective interpretation often projects accuracy where ambiguity exists. After all, the human mind is skilled at recognizing familiar forms. A carved reptilian figure may resemble different creatures depending on expectation. And expectation plays a powerful role in mysteries. What we hope to find can shape what we believe we see. But the Ica stones are not solely about dinosaurs. Many carvings depict scenes that inspire a different kind of intrigue. Surgical procedures, for instance. Some stones appear to portray medical interventions involving tools and patients. Cabrera interpreted these as evidence of advanced ancient medicine, perhaps even knowledge exceeding that of known pre-Columbian societies. Certainly, surgery in ancient Peru was real. Trepanation, the practice of drilling or cutting openings into the skull, was performed across Andean cultures with remarkable survival rates. Archaeological evidence confirms sophisticated medical practices involving herbal treatments and cranial surgery. This much is established history. Yet the scenes on certain Ica stones appear more elaborate. Some interpretations describe heart transplants or organ replacement procedures. Could these be symbolic representations, misreadings, or modern inventions shaped by contemporary medical imagery? The stones do not answer. They simply remain. Astronomical scenes invite similar uncertainty. Human figures gaze upward toward stars and celestial forms. Some observers interpret these carvings as records of astronomical knowledge or cosmological traditions. Ancient Andean cultures indeed maintained sophisticated relationships with the sky, tracking seasonal patterns and integrating celestial observation into ritual life. But more speculative theories extend further. They propose that the stones preserve knowledge inherited from a vanished civilization, perhaps one erased by catastrophe, remembered only through fragments. This idea belongs to a broader tradition of alternative history. Throughout the 20th century, theories emerged suggesting advanced prehistoric cultures existed before recorded civilization, their achievements later forgotten or suppressed. In these interpretations, the Ica stones become evidence not merely of artistic expression, but of historical amnesia. A library in stone, a message surviving from deep antiquity. Conventional historians remain unconvinced. They emphasize the absence of supporting archaeological evidence. No verified civilization possessing such technologies or chronology has been identified in Peru or elsewhere corresponding to the claims associated with the stones. And yet, the allure of lost knowledge persists. Perhaps because history itself contains genuine surprises. Entire cities have vanished beneath jungle and sand. Scripts remain undeciphered. Cultures once dismissed as primitive have revealed astonishing sophistication. The past has humbled certainty before. This does not confirm extraordinary claims, but it reminds us that human history is rarely simple. There is another layer to the Ica mystery, one less concerned with age or authenticity, and more with meaning. Why were these stones created, regardless of when? If many are modern, what inspired such elaborate imagery? Tourist demand offers one explanation. Economic necessity can shape artistic production, particularly in regions where ancient mysteries attract attention. But cultural expression may also play a role. The stones blend mythology, memory, science, and imagination in ways reflecting broader human impulses. We carve stories into objects. We preserve fears and hopes through symbols. And sometimes, the line between invention and belief becomes surprisingly thin. Visitors to the Museo Cabrera often described a strange atmosphere. Not fear, not spectacle, something quieter. The experience of standing among thousands of engraved stones produces a subtle psychological effect. Repetition accumulates meaning. Image after image invites comparison and interpretation. Patterns emerge, then dissolve. One begins asking not simply whether the stones are authentic, but why they provoke such strong reactions. Perhaps because they touch an uncomfortable boundary between evidence and possibility. Modern archaeology depends upon disciplined skepticism, a necessary protection against error and deception. Yet mystery survives precisely where evidence remains incomplete, and the Ica stones occupy that uncertain territory. Even today, debate continues in books, documentaries, and online discussions. New analyses occasionally surface. Private collections remain inaccessible. Stories circulate of undiscovered caches hidden within desert caves or buried near ancient tombs. Most archaeologists regard the matter as largely resolved. Many alternative researchers disagree. Between those positions lies a landscape familiar to anyone drawn to historical mysteries. Not certainty, but tension. The deserts around Ica have witnessed countless generations pass beneath the same unforgiving sun. Winds move across abandoned graves and forgotten pathways. Ancient cultures left textiles, ceramics, geoglyphs, and monuments that continue revealing their secrets slowly, often reluctantly. Among these remnants, the engraved stones endure as objects suspended between artifact and argument. Some may be modern creations, some perhaps older. Their exact story remains tangled in conflicting testimony, incomplete evidence, and decades of interpretation. And perhaps that is why they continue to fascinate. Not because they overturn history, not because they prove impossible claims, but because they remind us how fragile certainty can become when the past speaks through objects whose origins remain obscured.